Hello, and welcome to a special episode of Unsafe Space. I'm your host, Keri Smith, and I'm here with my co-host today, Carter Laren. Hello, Carter.
Hey, Keri. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited about today.
Yeah. We get to speak to two ladies today whom we've already spoken to, each one of them individually, but then they went off and did this awesome thing, which is collaborate on a book. So now we get to have both of them on. Our first guest is Dr. Linda Blade. Dr. Blade holds a PhD in kinesiology, if I can say that correctly, from Simon Fraser University in Canada. She's also a former Canadian champion in track and field, the heptathlon. She spent the past 30 years working as a sports performance professional, designing and implementing training programs for athletes across the spectrum from beginner to elite in over 15 sports. She currently serves as president of the Board of Athletics Alberta, which is the track and field association in the province of Alberta, Canada. And most recently, she co-authored the book Unsporting: How Transactivism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport, along with our other guest, Barbara Kay. Barbara Kay has been a weekly opinion columnist for Canada's National Post since 2003. For the last few years, she's also been a weekly contributor to the Post Millennial, which I know a lot of people read in our audience, and monthly to the Canadian Jewish News. Barbara appears twice weekly, Monday and Thursday mornings on SiriusXM's Post Media channel with host Anthony Furry to discuss current events and ideas. Her writing also appears in Quillette.com, the Dorchester Review, a Canadian history magazine, and C2C Journal, a conservative ideas magazine, amongst others. Barbara is also the author of 3 other books. So welcome to both of you. I guess we should say who's who. Linda, why don't you tell us how people can follow you and where they can find you online, and then Barbara can tell us.
Well, hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name's Linda Blade, and I go as Coach Blade on Twitter at Coach Blade. And you can find our book. This is the lovely book at unsporting.com. So those are the key elements.
Excellent.
Cool.
And Barbara, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
They can find me almost every week in the National Post. They can find me in the Post Millennial, as you noted. And for the last 2 years, I've been a monthly columnist for the Epoch Times. So I think your CV was a little bit out of date.
A little bit out of date.
Yeah, the Canadian Jewish News, alas, is defunct as a print magazine since last year, so it is online, but I'm no longer opinionating for them. That's where they can find me.
Okay, well, thanks for the update. So why don't we just start by having one of you just tell us a little bit about what the book is about and why you wrote it.
Linda.
Well, the book is about the idea that biological male has now been deemed that it's appropriate for that biological male to self-identify as a woman and participate with female athletes in women's sports. And this is a policy that and a reality that we're facing now in women's sports that is absolutely, in my opinion, unethical, unsafe, and absolutely unfair. And so somebody had to say something, and I am in a good position to say it. I have a PhD in kinesiology, sports sciences. I'm a professional coach and have been for 35 years. I'm the president of an association where we were tasked with coming up with either accepting this policy or having to provide a different policy. And actually, I was an athlete, so I understand, the difference between males and females in sport. So, it's my whole life has been involved with sports. And now in leadership positions, somebody had to take a stand, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't believe I'm going to ask this question in 2020. It's mm-hmm. embarrassing. What's the difference between men and women?
Well, I'm so glad you asked.
This is important, though, because I've started to see, the ACLU, which I know you guys are probably both familiar with the trajectory they've taken, but mm-hmm. I see them putting out propaganda that's telling people, and then I see people repeating it, that there's no biological difference. So
okay, so here's the thing. Even in the womb, even in gestation, there are differences that begin to happen when there's the presence of the SRY gene, XY, as far as males. Female is the basic, human model. And then if there happens to be the SRY gene and testosterone, then there's a differentiation into the male person. And so when babies are born, the boy has a penis and the girl has a vagina. And already from there, if you look at the growth charts for babies, even by the the NIHS, the national standards for growth and development, they've already got male and female, growth charts. So even from infancy, there are differences. And then through mid-childhood, there are, some differences between boys and girls, especially in the upper body. So lower body things like running and jumping, they can be comparable, although boys tend to be better than girls. But upper body strength and upper body, I would call it leveraging. Boys have a distinct advantage to the point where if you look at the ball throw, even from ages 5, 6, 7, all the way up to the puberty stage, boys still have about a 15% advantage in the upper body strength. But then after puberty, then it starts to expand. All the differences start to expand, and to the point where when males and females become adults, the men are heavier by 20 to 40%. By the same amount, 20 to 40%. Males have a vast advantage in terms of their cardiovascular system, like the way the oxygen can get into the blood and into the muscles. They have much greater strength, from 30 to 60% more strength. And there's some expressions of strength, especially when you add it up across the joints, like in punching ability, for example. Men have 160% advantage. Wow. So it depends on how, and so just running, like endurance running in itself, there's maybe about 10 to 15% advantage. So the difference between men and women ranges anywhere from like 10% all the way up to 160%, depending on what we call biomotor capacity you're talking about. But they definitely have bigger hearts, bigger lungs, longer limbs, different structures in their shoulders to allow them to actually express and leverage strength better. And so basically, this is what we talk about when we say that sexual dimorphism exists in humans. Dimorphism means distinct morphologies. So it's like the actual design of the body, whether it's the skeleton or anything else about that body. There are like 6,000 biological differences, variables from the, microscopic, nano, all the very smallest particles and machinery inside the cells, all the way out to the anatomical, so for overview design. Men have a distinctly different body than females. And even if, we'll get into this later, but even if you sort of reduce the amount of testosterone in the blood or something, doesn't mean it makes the heart smaller, the lungs smaller, take a couple inches off the length of the bones. Like, there is just no such thing as a male body transitioning into the female sex. You cannot change sex. You can change how you look. You can have plastic surgery and stuff. But to truly change sex, you would have to have every single one of billions and trillions of cells change from XX chromosome to XY, or the other way around, XY to XX. Every single cell in the body would have to be replaced by a female cell. I mean, it's just literally, we do not have anywhere close to the technology to do that. So there's just this vast, vast difference, again, between males and females. And, if you even reduce testosterone, it's just a little percentage. You maybe go from 50% stronger, a man would be 50% stronger, down to maybe 55 or 45% stronger. It just doesn't make that big of a difference.
That's what I was going to ask, because I see a lot of the people who are pushing for biological men to compete in women's sports, if they identify as trans women. I see them saying, well, if they take hormones, then it'll reduce any advantage that they have. And that always strikes me as kind of magical thinking, that you just take this magical hormone and everything
it's nowhere close. It's just nowhere close. It's just, this is not a thing. And shame on all of the sport authorities, including International Olympic Committee, for allowing this and overlooking the biological facts and not really looking at it closely enough and just maybe going on some sort of, well, we can talk about that later. There are specific reasons why maybe they made this decision. But as we wrote in the book, from the Olympic Committee all the way down to, from all the stages. So if it starts with the Olympic Committee, then the next stage, which are the national federations of each country, they then have an excuse to do this and allow males into women's sports. And then the provincial associations and the community sports and the school sports, everybody follows that lead. It's like a cascading sequence of acceptance of this ideology and this rule that absolutely makes no sense.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw out an analogy because this is kind of how I think of it biologically, and I want to know if it's correct. I kind of think of it as like the car's been built, and what kind of body you put on the car, you can alter the body of the car, but the engine's been built. And so even if you could replace even if you could replace the cells, you're still going to have the same lung capacity and heart size and muscle mass and all these things that were built based on the genetics of the person prior to birth even.
Well, I think that's a good analogy, because if you look under the hood, you might be able to reduce a V8 engine to a V6 engine, but if all the other engines that you're competing against could never be higher than V4s, then it's
still an advantage. Yeah. So a couple things. There's one other thing I want to do, which is a little bit of devil's advocate, but this is the wedge that I hear that convinces kind of normal people that maybe there's rationale behind this. And that wedge is, well, the Venn diagram between biological males and men is not 100%. There's this intersex. There's a tiny fraction of the population that actually is born in, I'll say the wrong body in quotes, but we'll say with like one set, or maybe even not XY, like XXY or some variation there, or born with both genitalia, or born with a brain configuration that doesn't match their body. Can you talk about that and why that matters or doesn't here?
Right. So that's what we call, is commonly term used for that is called intersex, but it's really disorder of sexual development. So DSD, disorder of sexual development. So in terms of the biological sex, it's the 46 the chromosome. So we say 46 DSD. And it is true that a very small, like maybe 0.01 or 0.02% of the population is born with ambiguous genitalia. And so it's a disorder. So you would say, but when they look closely, like if the doctors do a genetic test, somebody, even within that small, tiny group, there's two possibilities. You're either 46 DSD XY, which means you're a male with a disorder, or 46 DSD XX, which is either then you're a female with a disorder. So you may have, let's see, if you're male, 46 DSD XY, you would be a situation like Caster's-Mejia, where you have the male gene, and you actually have testes embedded deeply within your abdomen. So you really are biologically male, but then because certain things didn't finish or something happened there where maybe parts of the external genitalia look slightly male but slightly female, because remember, the female template is the baseline template for human beings. So in the utero, it's female plus extra is male. Okay. So maybe there wasn't a complete sort of finishing of the distinction into the male body, even though they do have the advantage of having testes there that can produce a certain amount more testosterone and androgenize the body. So even when you say there's these people that are in between, they're not really in between. They're either one with a disorder or the other with a disorder. So it's still binary with a disorder. So the reason
my understanding is there's not someone with both gametes.
Well, they can't have both gametes, right? So they can have what appears to be very few can appear to have almost fully formed both parts, as far as like testes, and then, maybe looks like a vulva or something. But the fact is that when you look carefully enough at the genetics and at this person medically, they really still are, their bodies are either organized around producing sperm or they're organized around producing egg. And not a single human, we can say one thing for sure, even despite the various very small percentage of disorders like that, intersex, even despite those people, there's not a single human being on the face of the earth that has come about into existence other than the union of a sperm with an egg. So there are some, disorders of sexual development where they're just sterile and they can't reproduce. But ultimately, for the propagation of the human species, we still are sexually dimorphic. There still is only a binary male or female. So really to use, and here's what I find disingenuous, is that the trans community, trans activists, use this small percentage of people with disorder as an excuse to sneak in like a Trojan horse into the women's category. When we're talking about trans, we're not talking even about intersex athlete. We're talking about a fully formed male who decides or who feels like the psychological need to present as a woman, and then that person is seeking access to the fully formed female category. So it's usually a fully formed male and then wanting to get into the female category. So they're using the existence of these remote medical conditions like intersex to justify or say that humans have a spectrum and they're not binary. And that's absolutely just taking the science and twisting it all up to confuse people.
Yeah. Right. And the athletes we're talking about here, what was her name? Keri. Or any of these athletes that are in the news, they're not intersex athletes. They are biological males.
Exactly.
Who've declared
they're males trying to identify as female, as women. And so they piggyback on the intersex condition, and it drives intersex people, the true intersex people population, find it objectionable that just a normal male who was born male and, just suddenly has transitioned in terms of their desire, what they want to do, how they want to present, that person would use their medical disorder as the excuse to do that is really objectionable.
Yeah.
Can one of you speak to what are some of the rules? Because I know we were talking about, just to go back for a second, about the argument that, well, if a biological male takes certain hormones, then he's going to remove any natural advantage he has, and how that's not true. But I've seen that put forward. Is there some sort of consensus shaking out, like at the Olympics or at the college level or at the high school level? Do they have any rules for people who are transitioning? Do they say you have to take cross-sex hormones, or is it just simply if you identify as, that's enough? Do you have to have surgery? Like, what is
Linda knows all about it, but I can tell you that it differs depending on where you are. The IOC does have some rules, but in Canada, which is where we put most of our focus in the book, there are no longer any rules. The guidelines in Canada come from the the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, a body that was created after the doping scandal of 1988, the Seoul Olympics. And it was created in order to ensure that sport remained both fair and free of unethical or unsporting behavior. And doping, of course, is the obvious one that they were thinking of at the time. But we consider what's happening now, allowing males with natural advantages to enter women's competition, as bad as doping, in the sense that the male advantage post-puberty is greater than, say, something like the 10% advantage that a doper might get. And their rules, their guidelines, the CCES, the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, that came out in 2015, their guidelines say as long as an athlete says they identify as the other sex, they cannot be questioned. They don't have to be taking hormones. They don't have to even live socially in the community for to show. They don't have to have presented socially. And moreover, these guidelines have been taken up as holy writ across Canada, high school, university, whatever. And not only that, but their guidelines say it may be that an athlete identifies as a male athlete, identifies as a woman this season in one sport. I kid you not. Yeah. But in the next season may identify as a male in another sport. So, and then they do allude to, it's conceivable that people might, imposters might take advantage of these freedoms, and of course, if it weren't so serious, you'd have to laugh at that. Oh, you think somebody might actually?
Yeah.
We had a doping scandal where we had athletes around the world cheating like mad on the advice of their coaches, So it's so ludicrous because you could be a man with a beard and a mustache and 6'3", and with all the characteristics and not even bother to change one little thing and just present yourself and say, I identify as a woman and I want to enter the 400-meter hurdles and
right.
Where's my t-shirt?
It's like if you're good enough, I could totally see someone with a bad intent. Like if they're good enough to compete against men in one sport, they're going to compete as men, so they get that title of best. But if they can't compete with men in another sport, it's like, well, I'll just sign up for the women's.
Well, I think it has happened, and I think it will continue to happen. The more observers see that there's no penalty and there's no even social punishment for doing so, why wouldn't you? So.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard because it's hard even to parody these people anymore because what they're doing is such a parody of themselves almost. But I
can I say something? Can I say something?
Yeah, please
okay.
Jump in.
So in the book we have a chapter on. And I quote Barbara Kay, my co-author, a lot. And we have a chapter about, watching the gatekeepers. And so these Canadian experts in sport, one of the things that this expert working group, who are all the top leaders of sport at this Canadian Center for Ethics in Sport, was, justifying their new policy. They literally said this, I'm going to quote it to you because it's just unbelievable. And it said, the expert working group acknowledges the concern that trans women athletes who grew up biologically male and who do not undergo hormonal intervention may be at a competitive advantage when competing in high-performance women's sport. Nonetheless, it is recognized that trans females are not males who became females. Rather, these are people who have always been psychologically female, but whose anatomy and physiology, for reasons yet unexplained, have manifested as male. You cannot make this up. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, you really can't make it up.
For reasons unexplained, they seem to be presenting as male. It's unbelievable.
You know what? Can I underscore something too? Because a lot of people look at the middle of the bell curve and they say like, well, I'm a couch potato and here's this female who's faster than me and better than me. So, there's not that much of a difference. But when you're talking about the tail end of that distribution, I mean, the elite athletes that are male are by and large well beyond the female end of the spectrum. It's ridiculous. We're not talking about people in the middle. These aren't two couch potatoes kind of competing to do stuff. Like these are the elite athletes that you're talking about. And even you have a person in your book that I think you said they went from 300 and something rank to first place. I don't even remember what.
So champ 390th in the men's division NCAA 400-meter hurdles. Two years later, women's champion. Hooray!
Right.
CC Telfer.
Right. And if you think about that, there's literally hundreds of guys that could be the champion in the female sport.
Yeah. And the coach of that person said with a straight face when interviewed, I've never seen an athlete with such mental determination. That was the key. That, in the coach's estimation, was the key element from going from 390th to first place. It had nothing to do with physiology.
Wow.
Nothing.
Wait. I have a defense of this, Barbara. It does take mental determination to declare that you're a woman and stick to it enough.
I guess.
To do that. So there is a sense, in a sense,
it takes
the
balls
coach is correct.
to do that.
It does. It takes some balls.
Funny. Funny. I think there's something really, I mean, Carter and I talk about this all the time in lots of different subjects lately about how it seems like we're living in this upside down world where projection is at a level I've never seen before. Maybe I just couldn't say before, but it's very Orwellian that you mentioned this, the CCES. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Canadian Center for Ethics in Sports.
So this organization that was created for ethics in sports and was created to make sure that it's a fair and level playing field, no cheating, are the ones who are, they're supposed to be the good guys who are making sure there's no cheating, and yet they're the ones who are putting this forward and saying,
"You can't do satire anymore because life is too ironic, too full of it's." And the people that the people like Linda and I often talk about this. I've often said to Linda, "So how did we escape this dragnet? Of being? How come we still think rationally and logically, and we still actually need evidence, and there is evidence when you talk, as you talked about the tail end, we have all the numbers, we have and we know who the fastest woman runner is, and we know who the fastest male runner is. And it's like, we're not talking about a 10th of a second here, so it's not like the evidence isn't there, but it's like everybody else that's in authority and who's creating the policy is nodding very, as Linda quoted, for reasons we're not sure of, and they'll say it with a straight face, but you kind of wonder if you woke them up at 2:00 in the morning and say, how many sexes are there? Well, 2.
Oh, wait, you didn't record that, did you?
Well, in fact, if you think about it just in general in society, I mean, you need they actually need the binary more than anybody, because how else would they transition into something else? I mean,
right. That's the paradox, right? What are you transing to if it's not dimorphic? Yeah,
I mean, right? That's the thing that I don't understand is that if we erased, the entire boundaries, what would they be transitioning into? I mean, this is the thing that I find really sort of troubling about the mentality itself. I used an analogy the other day on an interview about how, for me, the way it hits me is that suddenly we're supposed to be playing football on a field where you've taken away all the lines. So take away all the lines in sport, there's no way to have any meaning to what is the score or you've taken the line. So what happens though, in terms of the dialogue and sort of the basic dynamic here, is that people like Barbara and I, we're the people in sport that are required to keep the lines. So we, out of bounds or whatever, we still have to play by those rules, whereas they can hop around as if the boundaries don't exist. So it's basically, there's a category of people in society now where they can just feel free to do whatever they want. They could wander off and catch the football 150 yards out of bounds and then bring it back in, and that's okay for them. But the rest of us still have to play by the rules so they can come back into the game and do whatever they want to do. So it's really like this two sets of rules, actually.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this idea of inclusion, and that, of course, the rationale for all of this is as also Linda quoted, they do admit
there's an advantage.
That there is an advantage, but they feel that the price that has to be paid is okay because the value of inclusion trumps the human rights or the sex-based human rights of women. And they'll try to sort of fudge it and say, well, yes, there is an advantage. But look, in sports, many people have advantages. Rich people are able to train at with more resources than poor people, and they'll sort of kind of blur the lines between actual physiology and biology, and social conditions, or some men are taller than other men, and just like some women are as tall as men, and there's answers for all these things. But for somebody who's listening at a very superficial level, yes, that's true. A lot of poor children can't do professionals. They don't have the training. So this is just one more disadvantage. But it's not. One is primordial and one is fixable. You can give more money to poor children to be included in sport, and you'll fix that problem, or widen your recruitment pool. I mean, there's ways to fix other social or economic disadvantage.
But still, a poor boy is going to beat a poor girl, so that's just so irrelevant.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. And maybe
it's not like we have poor people and rich people sports. I mean, that's the only way that analogy would work, is they were like, if we divided sports instead of by male and female, if we had poor people and rich people sports, and then rich people started identifying as poor so they could win in the poor sports. Like,
interesting, wouldn't it?
Well, we do have golf, which is kind of in a category of
many sports. Some sports are far more expensive than others. I mean, if you want your kid to be a tennis champ, I mean, that's, we're talking big bucks there. But
I was going to recommend hockey, because you guys are from Canada. I grew up in upstate New York. Hockey was massively expensive, and there is an advantage to being wealthy if you want to play hockey. Absolutely.
But if you're a natural runner, then you just keep running around your high school track. So it's true but that's irrelevant, because, as you say, there's rich hockey players that are girls, and there's rich hockey players that are boys. So that is an irrelevant argument. But to the person who isn't listening, with people, they don't have time. They and if somebody says something very sincerely, and they're in a position of authority, like a sports sociologist, say, who uses these arguments, you say, well, he's an authority, he must know. And it's very unfortunate that so many people that are in either academic disciplines or are policymakers at a governmental level, that you naturally assume they know what they're talking. And speaking of that level of authority, Linda must tell you the story of how the IOC came to their policy. People think, well, the IOC, this is an international organization. They have the benefit of experts, and they must
really know.
They must study this before they change a policy. They must consult with hundreds of the most expert people in the world. But I think one of the most interesting chapters in the book is the way the IOC came to their decision to make a momentous, earth-shattering change to Olympic sport. And of course, everything trickles down from that. So I'd love for Linda to explain that to you.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
So around 2000, maybe by 2003, the ideology was shifting a little, and they made a really quiet decision at the International Olympic Committee, is what we're talking about, made the decision that they would allow transsexuals into women's sports. So males who had undergone the surgery, lived as women for 3 years with their low hormones, and then those people would be allowed, into the women's game. And their assumption, they even said it at the time, they just didn't think there would be that many. There would, like, the going through surgery and having all that, there's so few men who would do that. So they would just allow the few, and there wouldn't be that many. And so there was one guy, one male-born athlete or two, who started to trickle into sport. And then the one person was actually a Canadian male cyclist who found that because he had been undergone the surgery and removed testes and everything, didn't even have enough testosterone, because he was born with a male body, and now he was presenting as a woman and trying to go into women's cycling. Didn't even have enough testosterone to actually feel like they could train properly, get the recovery going. So right away, Worley was the fellow's name, and he went into Kristen Worley, identified as woman, and then he started essentially advocating for an exemption to take more testosterone because his body was desperately in need of testosterone, obviously because biologically male needed testosterone, so needed to have a little bit of an exemption. And so went through this whole human rights court, the United Cycling Union, International Cycling Union, took them all to court on the human rights basis and said, I just need this medical exemption to be able to take testosterone. And so already, why didn't they just admit at that point, look, if you need all this testosterone because your body is male and you need it to train, then why don't we just admit you're male and put you back in the male section?
Yeah,
but instead of that, they said, oh, yeah, well, OK, so by 2015, the IOC just threw up its hands. The International Olympic Committee basically just threw up its hands and said, OK, well, we're going to just do away with the requirement for surgery, and we'll just let them have their testosterone just slightly below 10 nanomoles per liter, which is still like 8 nanomoles per liter higher than female athletes are allowed. Live as a woman for a year, whatever that means. And so that was the rule that they snuck in 2015 without consulting much. In fact, the only person they consulted with, and this is what's Barbara's getting to, the only person they consulted with was another Canadian trans-identifying male who was a recreational runner named Joanna Harper. And around 2006, 7, 8, where Facebook and social media was just getting started, Joanna Harper wanted to sort of prove that with hormone replacement therapy, a transgender, a male transitioning to woman, if they took hormones, it would bring their running times down to the female, like the women's times. So Joanna Harper went about looking all over online and managed to find 8 other trans identified males who had run long distance races as male in their 20s or 30s, transitioned, and then later in life was their self-declared new running time, which happens to be lower and maybe the female, close to the female level. So like self-reported times, not peer-reviewed, 8 athletes, 8 male recreational runners who identified as women, and self-identifying and self-declaring their times to have dropped, the magical 15%. So now it looks like if you take hormones, it's going to make you completely on par with the women, except one of the males actually improved over the 20 years. And he called that an outlier and left that number out. I say that in the book. They left the one number out that would have disproved his point. They called it an outlier and left it out of the average. And that was a study published in Uncommon Ground or something. It's like one of those online publishing, which is like it's not peer reviewed. And that's the person, Joanna Harper, that got invited onto the International Olympic Committee Medical Commission when they had to make a decision about whether, to deal with this new rule about just keeping your hormone level down a little bit, no surgery. And that's the person they invited onto their medical commission, just based on this one study of 8 male runners. So basically an N of 8, a number of subjects, 8. It took an N of 8 recreational male runners to change the international rules for all women's sport all around the world for women. And how dare that person be the one, Joanna Harper, a male person, be the one to be sitting in that seat and having the International Olympic Committee listen to them because they're so, we've got this trans person did this great study. And basically lately when somebody was asking, well, don't you know that males, that males still have an advantage. And even Joanna Harper himself said that this should only be applied to running, not other sports, because running, the difference between men and women in running is like 10 or 15%, but the difference between, let's say, weightlifting is 50%. So really
distance running, not sprinting.
Not sprinting, just distance running. It should only be applied to distance running, but it looks like hormone replacement therapy brings it down, at least for running, and basically mitigates all the differences. When that question was put to Joanna Harper lately on Twitter, Joanna Harper's response was, well, we had to make a decision somehow, and so we just made the decision, as if it's his right as a male person to sit there in the International Olympic Committee Medical Commission and be the one to make a rule change that applies to every sport in the world, for all women in the world, every sport.
Can we just
runners
point out that that's not science, and that doesn't even, I wouldn't even use the word study for what you just
It's
described.
not even a study.
It's not a study.
It's an average.
It's a survey of people.
It's a survey, yeah, of self-reported
Yeah.
results.
It's
Yeah, and by the way, my mile time has doubled since I was for 20 years ago. Like, big freaking deal.
Yeah.
Like, I'm
Yeah.
older.
So-
Like,
That's right.
want? And by
That's
the
right.
way, I can take, if you want a study where I report I'm slower after doing anything, I can give you that result. I am happy to run slower.
But this is known to be selection bias. It's the only thing that's worthy of study is a community study or random like if you put out a call for, we're looking for a certain, people know what result you're looking for. I mean, so the only people that are going to actually ask to be in your study. So the whole thing was so anti-science, not just not science. It's anti-science. And the IOC bought it and never considered the consequences. And that's why we're in a critical time right now, waiting for the first trans athlete who will be competing, which is Laurel
Hubbard.
Laurel Hubbard in weightlifting. Talk about coming back when you're older. He is older. He transitioned in 2013. Before that, he was a not international level weightlifter in the male division at all. I think he was junior champ in New Zealand, which is a very tiny pool of weightlifters. But he would never have made it to the Olympics as a male weightlifter. And he came back after many years out of the sport because he plateaued. And now here he is, and there's tremendous interest, obviously, and he's likely going to get the gold or silver. And frankly, people like us would like him to get the gold to make the case to say, okay, now do you believe it? I mean, we thought that the backlash would start happening thick and fast when these high school girls were being beaten, and when the college and we kept waiting for the big backlash and the lawsuits but I have to say I'm quite shocked that Linda Blade is still the only coach, not only in Canada but in the world, who is publicly out there saying, how many coaches are there in the world? Like thousands and thousands and thousands. And she's the only one that has had the guts and the principles to say, no, this can't be.
Let me hazard a guess that you hear from other coaches who agree with you, but they're too afraid.
That's right. They are afraid for their jobs or what their social network's going to say about them. Completely forgetting the fact that our main job as coaches is to protect our athletes and to represent our athletes and make sure that there's a fair and level playing field. And, frankly now, because like in the policy that I ran into in 2018, I was on a previous show of yours about a year and a half ago, and where I was talking about how insane it was. I ran into this thing in 2018 and found, I was at the national meeting and found out this policy. And one of the interesting things about this policy in Canada is that not only are they allowed to just willy-nilly just self-identify one season to the next, whatever, not have surgery, not have any kind of hormonal intervention, not even shave their beard if they don't want to. And basically, after they identify, so the way the policy is written that was being pushed at us, at associations like mine, was once they say what they are and they identify, then we're allowed to say anything. So not only do we have to accept who they are on the moment, but then we can't keep a record of it. We can't say anything. We can't share the information. It's so they basically shut down the dialogue once that person says who they are. So lo and behold, Barbara, I don't know if you know this, we have a new one in the Olympics. Now it happens to be Canadian. There's now archery. It was just Graham Linehan was paying attention closely to an article in the Toronto Star and noticed that this archer from Canada, looked awfully male and head and shoulders above the other females. And sure enough, when we looked at it, now this person's name is Stephanie Barrett, and this person has been selected to be Canada's woman archer in the Olympics in Tokyo. And this person has the same story pretty much in terms of just the age, 35 to 37 years of age, transitioning later in life from male to wanting to present as a woman. And suddenly, just to help affirm themselves, joined women's archery. And now they stand there with a stronger shoulder breadth and like stronger shoulder muscles, can like zip that arrow at the target with probably much greater speed than the other women, so less susceptible to wind interference, all that kind of stuff. Suddenly, all of a sudden, some Canadian woman or some woman in the world didn't get a position in the Olympic Games. In Canada, it might be Tanya Edwards is the next one in line, but it might have been somebody else in the world because of the global point system. Doesn't suddenly get to go to the Olympics because this person named Stephanie Barrett has taken this position and excluded a woman. And the stupid thing is the Center for Ethics in Sports calling this an inclusive policy. It's not inclusive when you're excluding women and females from their own sport.
Maybe we should. I do want to step back here, because it would be honest if the world said we're not gonna divide sports by sex, and you're gonna end up with male-dominated sports, and that's the end. But there's a reason that we decided
it would be male sports.
There's a reason we decided to separate them, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a good reason we decided to separate them. And I don't think people are seeing. I think a lot of people look at this and they kind of feel like if it doesn't affect them personally, they're like, whatever. Can you talk about the impact this has had on young women, both in high school and college and elsewhere, that there's a reason we have female sports? How are those people being affected?
Before Title IX in the United States came into, that guaranteed women the rights to have the same access to resources and to have more encouragement. Female participation in sports was, I don't know the number, but it was very low. And it skyrocketed after that once women started to be encouraged. And so the trajectory has basically been only about 30 to 40 years of actual women flourishing in sport. And now you're going to see this constriction, because anybody should have the imagination to think, what's a little girl, a kid on a soccer team, how many times is, she going to have the ball flattening her like on the ground because a boy can kick it like twice as hard and fast? And, they're going to get discouraged. They're going to be fearful. We know that. We know from anecdotal evidence. We have some in the book of kids. They don't want they don't want to be on the field with the male bodies. Like, they get it very quickly that you can get hurt, and anyways, it's psychologically intimidating. To be with someone, it's like a 13-year-old girl having to compete against a 17-year-old girl. Like, there's a huge difference. So it's happening already, and it's going to keep happening. If this doesn't turn around quickly, our fear is, we were very happy that the book came out at least before the Olympics. Our fear is that there'll be a tipping point when it will be no longer possible to pull back, because you'll have too many people invested in the myth, and they won't be able to. And at that point, the evidence will all be there that the women are fading, and that but then they'll have committed themselves, and it will just be male sports again.
Well, it will be a lost generation, I would say, because a good example in the book is we talk about what's happened in the roller derby, like women's roller derby in certain parts of Canada, and that's kind of a fringe sport for some people. But, already when you interview the females who have self-excluded from the roller derby, whenever there's males start getting involved in self-identifying into women's roller derby, all of a sudden you run into females who just drifted away because they got hurt, they got injured. And in that sport, because it's a contact sport, you kind of expected that maybe you might get hurt. So the women who get hurt really badly because there's a male in that race, they just walk away because they don't feel they have a right to complain. They're in a sport where they were going to maybe get injured anyway. So then there's a lot more just walking and drifting away because they don't feel like they feel it's unsporting of them to complain about injuries because that's part of roller derby. Like if you just get injured too badly, you just disappear. But now here's another thing we have to think about. World Rugby pushed back finally last fall. They did a review of the data and realized not a single study showed that taking, hormone replacement therapy caused the males to diminish their advantage, which would result in a possibility of 20 to 30% increase in head and neck and back spinal injuries to female players in rugby because it's, collisions and contact. So what World Rugby did, they made the brave decision to say international rugby will not allow male bodies into the female elite game, but they threw the dog a bone in terms of the national unions, the rugby unions, USA Rugby, Canada Rugby, Australia Rugby. They basically tipped their hat to them and said, well, you can do whatever you want in your communities. Men can self-identify at the community level if you want, but internationally, they won't be allowed. But here's what's going to happen. I would predict this because I've seen it. I'm a coach in the system. If World Rugby is going to tell nationals, like the rugby unions, that they can go ahead and allow males into the game at community level where the athletes get started, guess what's going to happen? Same thing. You're basically weeding out the girls. The really good, talented ones might get really hurt, injured, if not suing rugby, which is a big risk, but they'll get hurt, walk away. So now basically you've depleted your talent pool so that by the time women get to the international game, and now they are actually women competing against women, it's going to look pathetic because your best talent has been weeded out along the way because they've been destroyed along the way because of male bodies. And so what I'm going to say is it's going to make international women's rugby look really pathetic in about 5 or 6 years or 10 years because who's going to end up showing up? Like half of your best talent has already been injured and left the sport. So it doesn't do women any service internationally because it just looks bad. I mean, it's just the players that end up showing up look even worse compared to the men because you've weeded out a lot of talent along the way.
Yeah.
Can you guys talk a little bit about how did the two of you come together to write this book? And how hard was it to get this published?
Well, it was real easy to get it published because we were actually, it was actually semi-commissioned in the sense that Linda and I had got to know each other because I got interested in the subject when I saw that Linda was out there being public about it. I forget the first time we met, but I was encouraging her.
Post-millennial. We had an article in Post-millennial.
Oh, I know what it was. Linda said to me, gee, I wish you'd write a piece in the Post-millennial and I'll give you the talking points and all that. And I said, it would be much more authoritative coming from you. I'm just someone doing research. You're living this and you should write but I'm not a journalist. I said, I'll help you. And
not a writer.
Well, she said she wasn't a writer, but I have to say she's a very quick study. So I said, write what comes out of you. Don't worry about the form and I'll help edit it and yada, yada. So we went through, and it wasn't bad to begin with, but I sort of edited and we went back and forth on it. That was the first thing she wrote. It was a fantastic piece for the Post-millennial. And by the next time she started writing, she already had absorbed a lot of the format rules and she's a good writer. She's a good writer now. So that was the beginning. And then I wrote a piece that sort of was a follow-on from that. And at the same time, Ezra Levant from Rebel News had said to me, I'm putting out these short books on controversial subjects. And if there's anything you've got to pitch, I'd love to have you write something. I said, well, there's a subject I want to pitch, but I don't want to be the writer. I want to be the co-writer or the secondary writer. I want the lead writer to be an authority. And I think this Linda Blade, who's brave and courageous and doing all this stuff, he said, great, as long as your name's on the book. I said, it's going to be on the book, but she's going to be the one that's, he said, great. write it. So we did. So it was a joint effort, but all the knowledge part comes from Linda, and a lot of the the writing is a joint thing, and the formatting and the brainstorming about which chapter is going to go where and what has to be first and what. Oh, should we add this or should we? It was a really fun collaboration, and
it really was.
Well, yeah, it really went well for both of us, and we never had an argument about anything. It was a great experience for me, and I know for Linda, it's a point of pride to have got this out professionally. And we know, and what's great about it is we know that it is part of the literature now at Sport Canada, and the people at the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport have had to bite the bullet on this. I think they are grinding their teeth over it.
Wow,
which is good. And so it's now part of it's in the stew of because things at the upper levels of sport policy in Canada are still kind of in flux. Nothing's set in stone. So we're thrilled that this book is being taken into consideration before things do get cemented into place.
Now, I will
Are you
say,
optimistic? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I will say one thing before you jump in with another question, though. Well, first of all, it was a huge honor. I mean, to get to know Barbara and to have her help and mentorship was just amazing. I read articles of hers in the newspapers for years, and I just thought she was clever. Never in a million years would I have thought she'd ask me to collaborate on something. So it was a huge honor. And of course, got to thank Rebel News for taking a chance on me as an author. Hadn't written a book before in terms of this. I wrote a PhD thesis, but that's technical writing. So that leads me to the point of saying quickly, I'll say it. Initially, I was so worried about being too technical that it was a bit too chatty. And remember, Barbara, the first 6 chapters were, it was a bit chatty. We were writing it for soccer moms and hockey dads, just trying to keep it at a sort of a conversational level. And it was a little bit too schmarmy or something. So at some point, Barbara and I made the decision, I think it is worth it putting a little bit more technical information in. We had submitted in November already for publication, but then when Joe Biden came out with his executive order, we had to take it back from the publisher and put in the last chapter on Joe Biden's executive order. And so then that was in February writing that. So there were a lot of different sort of permutations and differences in tone that we went through writing this book. And I keep saying, I'm really hoping it's a good balance between some science, some technical information, but mixed in with good storytelling. And I met a woman today because I'm on holidays in Vancouver here, and she's in the library. She's one of the librarians of Vancouver Public Library, and she basically has just finished reading it. And she told me that it's really, really a very well balanced book. So I'm quite pleased with it, actually.
I'm glad.
Well, like I said, I've only read
hearing that for the first time, so thank you for sharing that, and that's great news.
Good. I wanted to sneak that in there. I thought you'd appreciate it.
I do.
Yeah, I've only read the first couple of chapters, but it's very readable, and there's real information in it. It's not just like, it doesn't feel like just someone mouthing off their opinion. There's like actual information in there, and it's
that's
very
it.
readable. So
you want it to stay reader friendly, but you don't want it to be lightweight. I'm glad we took the time to we did a lot of rewriting, which is normal book, and it paid off, I think.
Right. So, and it speaks to the collaboration. It speaks to the collaboration. It really was a really very balanced effort.
So I'm really encouraged that there's someone like Rebel who is looking to publish things that might be considered controversial in the upside down world that we're in. Because I was expecting to hear that it was hard to get it published. And I wanted to know if you...
I don't think anybody else in Canada would have published it.
They would not have.
Yeah, nobody would not have. And I just saw today, I wonder what kind of pushback you've received. I would like to hear some of the negative responses and some of the positive responses, because I just saw today the American Booksellers Association put out a notice saying it was an apology. They said an anti-trans book was included in our July mailing to members. This is a serious, violent incident that goes against our policy. And they go on to, and I found out they were talking about Abigail Schreier's book, apparently. So, a violent incident.
So many hits. She's taken so many hits with that book. Although, of course, the more that happens, the more books she sells. So, but violent. It's such a great book, and it's so the tone is so
loving.
Beautiful. It's so level-headed, and it's so compassionate. Really, I mean, it's
very compassionate.
Nobody's read, anybody that's criticized that book has not read it. That's 100%, because you can't come away from that book. But it's so interesting that the fear anybody in the publishing world has of touching that third rail. So I knew there was no point in writing a book on spec. That was, and then pushing it to publishers and getting rejected. So this was like manna from heaven. I mean, it was, hey, write a book. Yeah, but it's very controversial. Great, write it.
Yeah, it was really a blessing, actually, to have a publisher that was driving to get this done and wanted to get it out there and have a different form of narrative happen. And I have had thousands of comments and privately and through the various podcasts, on YouTube and stuff. And about, I would say, good 95% of commentary is completely supportive. It's amazing. And this, everybody has said that the sports issue may be the tip of the arrow in terms of the head of the spear, like in terms of starting down this path of distinguishing between biological sex-based rights versus human rights of self-identifying peoples. And how do we parse that out? I think that's a conversation that we definitely have to have in society. But the thing is, the pendulum swung way too far, and I think everybody's seeing it in sports now. And a lot of people are just saying this is disgusting and ridiculous. Like, how in the world did we get here? Of the ones that actually lash back at me, it's either complete invective as far as like just terrible language and accusations and hurling the F-bombs and like just somebody who's just angry, or people who clearly didn't read the book or saying things that I've said that didn't happen. So the ones who read the book like it. And there's a lot of, I have trans identifying colleagues who are very grateful because the trans activists who are, pushing for males and female sports are not doing anybody any favors. Even the trans community is afraid of the backlash that's going to happen because this is so unrealistic. And so I have a lot of support even from a lot of the trans community. And so it's a tiny, tiny minority of people who are angry. They want to push themselves across the boundaries. No questions asked. The rest of us have no rights. And, those people, I almost feel like, I don't know. It just doesn't bother me at all because it's pretty clear that there's some sort of just a mental, I'm not going to say mental illness, but just there's a psychological angst involved in it that probably has nothing to do with anything I said. So, I feel so much support, to be honest. I feel a lot of support, and I hear a lot of support coming back, and I'm most appreciative. So I'm so happy that Barbara and Rebel News and everybody gave us this chance to get this information out. And reference, once you start reading the book in your book club, you will see that everything's referenced to the nth degree because we have to be careful that whatever we say has to be supported. And so we really went out of our way to make sure that would happen. And I think it's a pretty fair book.
So are you positive? Are you optimistic about what's happening in the future for women's sports? Do you think it's going to change? Or are you pessimistic and you think it's going to get worse before it gets better?
I think it's going to get a little bit worse.
I think so. I'm by nature I call myself a realist, which I think automatically means you're a bit of a pessimist, and it's better to be that way so that you're nicely surprised if it goes the other way. But I am pessimistic in the short term. It's going to be
me too.
It's going to be a huge battle. If things are going to turn around, it's going to be a very ferocious battle to get it right. These people are organized, well-funded, and ruthless. So we're not up against, a bunch of just individuals. This is a movement. To me, it's like the sport equivalent of sport. I mean, and other areas too. But it's a sport equivalent of Antifa. It
really is. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I also appreciate that you said you drew a distinction, Linda, between trans people and the people who are pushing trans sports, because I think that's so important. And they oftentimes, the people who are pushing this, what I view to be an ideological agenda, part of an overall ideological agenda, they want to claim to speak on behalf of different groups that they don't represent. So it's like they want to pretend that they're trans people, and maybe some of them are trans, but that's not who's pushing this. They don't speak for all trans people. And some of the loudest voices I've heard against trans women or biological men participating in women's sports are trans voices.
It's true.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that distinction. And Barbara, I just want to say that's where I'm at on everything recently. Is I'm pessimistic in the short term, but very optimistic in the long term.
Yeah.
Well, you're young, so you may actually see your dream come true. I don't have that much time left, so so let's say I'm pessimistic for my lifetime. But
maybe you should.
Yeah.
In that case, have you looked into collapsitarianism? Because they're trying to speed it all up.
Life is already speeded up. When you get older, it's true. Life does seem to speed up, and that's a fact. So I'm not looking to speed it up anymore.
Yeah.
Well, you have a little bit of the collapsitarianism going on already, because you both really want the New Zealand weightlifter to get the gold.
That's right.
That's a collapsitarian mindset. It's like, just do it, so that people can see how horrible it is now and get it over with. Otherwise, this is going to drag on for a long time.
I've never heard that term before, but I will have to look that up. See if it's a real thing,
I just will say, like you, Barbara, I view myself as a realist, but it turns out that even in my lifetime, and I am younger than you, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be pessimist in my life. I'm hoping my children live in a different world, but these battles are long.
Yeah,
right? This didn't happen overnight. This happened, over decades. It took decades.
20, 30 years.
We were only seeing a tip of a very big iceberg. And you have kids, and I have grandchildren that are, just in their teens. One, a very serious hockey player. I mean, so this is my motivation, is to see my athletic grandchildren. They're all girls, 5, that nothing should stand in their way. And certainly not this. I mean, not this injustice. That's so wrong.
Yeah.
I naively think if we just renamed women's sports to female sports, the arguments would go away. But I know that's not what would happen.
Well, our solution in the book literally does say, really, we can keep a binary that's completely inclusive by having 2 categories: female restricted to the biological female, and open. And open means anybody, like male, trans, anybody who's female plus extra is in the open. So even if you're a trans identifying female who happens to want to be identifying as a man, right now those people still stay in the women's sports. But if they want to take testosterone dope and go up to the open category and compete there, and I think that makes it completely inclusive. So that's what would happen if we want to keep the binary. If you want to make more categories, that's a different story. But even when interestingly here, and this speaks to what Keri was talking about, when you offer a third category, like the middle, the trans community, like people like Joanna Harper, will not accept that, because the males who are identifying, particularly later in life, they literally need to be in the women's category to self-affirm. So they need to be in with the women as a sort of a social affirmation exercise.
Therapy for them. It's therapy for them.
It's social therapy. So they're using sport as a form of social therapy. They're saying, I want to be in this with the women so that I can be accepted as a woman. So if you say, well, we'll give you a separate category, well, that defeats the whole purpose. They can't be in with the women. So, but then, as I pointed out the last time I was talking to you, Carter and Keri, was if you take that logic down to its final conclusion, it may be okay for one or two of them when they come in, but pretty soon it'll be more and more males self-identifying, to the point where the entire female final will be males who are trans-identified males. And now they're not going to be happy because they're just going to be surrounded by males and they're not going to get the affirmation they seek anyway. Meanwhile, they've destroyed women's sports and they'll probably end up going somewhere else because they can't get the affirmation there anymore because it's just full of males. So when you take this to the nth degree, it almost seems like, it's going to take almost a complete destruction of the female athletes' space before they'll move on. And then everybody will realize, oh gosh, that was a big mistake, wasn't it? So I worry that it'll be like a 10 or 20 year period of time before we get through all this madness and reestablish the sex-based boundaries. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it comes much faster than that. But I think it might have to be self-apparent at the end once you let this experiment play out.
Yeah, it's almost 1984-ish in that what they really want is for you to say there's no difference between them and a biological female. That's what they want.
Yes, and it'll never be true.
They can't. Yeah, right. That will never be true. So they'll never be happy.
Yeah, right. And they'll never be. And so meanwhile, they'll destroy sport for an entire generation of girls, but also sport in general, as I point out. Barbara and I had this discussion. Why didn't you say destroying women's sport as part of, like, it's just destroying sport?
Yeah.
We didn't say destroying women's sport. The reason is because at ground level, when you make this stupid rule, you're putting coaches, officials, everybody's at risk of saying the wrong thing, especially in Canada with our laws. Yeah. So what happens is all the volunteers just disappear and you can't host competitions for little boys or little girls. And in my association, that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about protecting parents, coaches, officials, anybody who volunteers at the grassroots level in sport. We're going to lose all of our capacity to actually run the sport for boys and girls if we make it an uncomfortable thing or they're in legal jeopardy just to try to navigate the language around being involved in sport.
You're forcing an entire industry, or shouldn't be called an industry, but to be a liar to participate in it. Like everybody,
you have to lie.
You have to lie on a routine basis in order to be a stakeholder in sport. And that is the essence of totalitarianism, is to force people to continually lie. And then it becomes you're punished if you won't. It's the 2 and 2 equals 5 thing. I mean, it is Orwellian. There's a reason people keep referring to Orwell when we talk about what's going on. Because and we start with a quotation from Orwell, doublethink, to know something is true and to believe it's true at this, to know something is not true, but to be forced to believe it's true at the same time. So it's a corruption of our minds and soul. It's soul destroying.
So it destroys the meaning of sport. It destroys the meaning of what you're doing, and so I'm worried that it will get to the point where even community and school sport, like people will just start opting out in general, just because it's just too wrought.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could envision a future where, like you said, it goes too far to come back from, and then, if future generations decide to say, okay, you can have women's sports, we're going to create another category for women minus extra. And you just recreate it. But they would be upset that, wait, but we want to be in women minus extra.
Yeah, no. There's no easy fix to this problem. No. I'm actually, I have a 5 o'clock scheduled other meeting. So.
That's fine. We have to wrap up.
No, it's been wonderful, but I hadn't realized.
No, we really appreciate your time.
No, I've enjoyed it very much. But I
go for it, Barbara. I got you.
Tell everybody one last time where they can find info on your book. The book is called Unsporting, and you can find it at
unsporting.com. Unsporting.com.
Unsporting.com. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, ladies, so much
you
for
both.
being with us today.
Thank you, Keri and Carter. It's been a great pleasure and an honor.
Yeah.
you.
Great chatting with you again.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Have a great summer.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms. Well, mostly. And you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to its thinky talk. The following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and will be recycled as part of our sustainability program. Don't be sad. You can't make an omelet without purging all dissidents. Honestly, I am worried that you have been exposed to extremist content. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks at the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.